There was that random one where the kind of cars were kind of semi-made out of plants. I can't quite remember what that one was called. Was that Jason and the Wheelers or something?
Jason the Wheeled Warriors, was it?
Something like that. And obviously the other kind of weird one was obviously like Dungeons and Dragons, Ulysses. I actually once, when I first got my own DVD player, my own place, I actually asked for the Ulysses box set as a Christmas present because I don't remember it having an ending.
No.
Like, it's just one of those programs that just, a bit like, what was the one that, I mean, this wasn't a TV program, so we're already on tangents. The guy that went back in time and like he would go into somebody else's body every Quantum Leap. Yeah. Again, Quantum Leap is just one of those programs that they never felt like there was a resolution. Like,
Quantum Leap's bonkers.
But that's it. I think it's one of those where I never saw the ending. So
right.
Like, Ulysses and Quantum Leap, I think two things for me where like each week you get drawn in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure I ever achieved resolution on either of those programs.
Try and find the final episode of Quantum Leap on YouTube or something, because it's insanely existential.
Okay.
It's all set in a bar where the bartender might or might not be gone. It's incredibly, it's something else. If you compare it to sort of like the reasonably straightforward story of every episode of Quantum Leap, where it's just kind of helping people become a better person, the direction it takes for the last episode is something else. I recommend trying to find that.
Okay. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, they cancelled that before they ever actually did a final episode, so you never know if they got home.
Oh, I didn't realise that. Does Ulysses have an ending? Did you?
I don't know. I can't remember. I feel like I need to kind of go back and dig them out, because it was kind of quite hard going, because it is chunky.
The one that I remember as being never known whether it had an end was Mysterious Cities of Gold.
Oh yes, I love that. Again, I'm not sure I ever saw a final episode. I think I might have also asked for that on DVD at one point, but I'm not sure they've ever released it on DVD.
No.
So it's one of those where you've got to find it online.
Have you watched any of the new She-Ra?
The new She-Ra? No, like for me that would be. I think I've come across it when I've been scanning Netflix for my son. But to me, to remake He-Man or She-Ra or anything like that, that's just a bit of a travesty. Like that's like
the new She-Ra's actually really good. Yeah, it's a lot less male gaze. It's got all the same characters, but it's a proper kind of it's super woke. It's fabulous. But it's really they've done a really good job of it, and they've managed to keep a lot of the same characters, but with a slightly they've made it and less. It's the friendships between the characters feel more important, and it's not necessarily all about She-Ra hitting people with a sword. And the horse is brilliant. The horse is like genuinely hilarious.
Okay, all right. You're talking around. I think when I saw it come up, I think because I've got such nostalgia around the visuals of the 80s cartoons, because there was a very distinct look, that to kind of see something that I knew and grew up with and was so kind of, I guess in some ways, emotionally attached to. I think I had She-Ra. It didn't, when it came past, it didn't look right, and I think that was enough to kind of. But I guess on reflection, that was kind of a fairly superficial.
It is easily done. I was very excited. My eldest has been getting into Transformers more recently, and we ended up watching the Bumblebee movie, which has like 7 minutes of old school Generation 1 Cybertron battles with Soundwave and the cassettes and Optimus Prime and all of that. And I was just like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
Okay, because I've been deciding whether or not to watch Bumblebee. So I remember like watching the first couple of Transformers, and I think there was one that was just really silly, and I think like just way too much action, not enough story, and also for anybody I think it's the one where they had the Egyptian pyramids. Oh. They were kind of transitioning between the pyramids to somewhere else. It's like that just completely defies geography, and I think the lack of realism was just really annoying me. So I kind of I love action movies, anything that has pointless violence and explosions. Like, I'm there.
So that one you're talking about is Revenge of the Fallen.
Okay.
And I walked out of the cinema. I've only walked out of the cinema for like 2 films, and that was that one. The fact that they went through all that process of putting together Devastator and having like the Constructicons all joined together to fight Devastator, and then Devastator Pyramid. It didn't even fight any of the robots. It's like, seriously, Power Rangers manages that kind of escalation between like different sizes of robots and monsters on a weekly basis more effectively than that multi-million-pound movie did. I was really So disappointed.
Was it the following one after that had Mark Wahlberg on it? And another fact that why would a Transformer be sitting in his barn was there was slightly more story to it.
That one is slightly better, I think. But Bumblebee's actually, I think it's the best of the live action Transformers films. I appreciate that's a really low bar. Like a really, really low bar.
I like low bar. Like, so, for me, pointless version. So we're talking Vin Diesel, kind of Jason Statham. Mechanic. I like Mechanic. I think Mechanic's a good one. But yeah, violence, explosions, fighting, martial arts. Because to me, that's how I relax. Like, I'm not watching a movie to be educated. Like, I want 90 minutes to 2 hours of visual entertainment, and then I can switch off and go, I don't need to think about the movie ever again.
Where do you sit on John Carpenter movies?
John Carpenter. Oh, I mean, I loved Big Trouble in Little China. That's like one of my favorite movies. I'm not sure how I feel about the remake.
Me too.
I think it was a brilliant bit of kind of 80s, 90s cinema. I don't think I saw The Thing until I was a lot older. Just I guess being a bit more kind of horror movie. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I think just the collaboration between John Carpenter and Kurt Russell is just a good pairing. So they kind of escape from New York, escape to LA. I mean, they escape to LA.
It's very, very silly. Bruce Campbell as the Surgeon General of Los Angeles.
Yeah, just the whole kind of plastic. And I think particularly with the second, like with the LA one, the way that there's almost that subtle commentary on the kind of, I guess, very superficial, image orientated culture of LA. That it actually moves me, but there's a bit of kind of a subtext going on as well.
Absolutely. I rewatched They Live not long since.
Okay.
Have you seen that one? It's great, and it's kind of weirdly relevant again. Sadly relevant again. It's in some respects it's John Carpenter attempting to do for pro wrestling what he did for kung fu movies with Big Trouble in Little China.
It's like an interesting concept.
And it involves Rowdy Roddy Piper playing a drifter who stumbles across a global conspiracy of aliens who have infiltrated the highest levels of our society. It's really, to call it a subtext would probably be overstating. It's kind of like the text. But yeah, it's kind of become weirdly relevant again, I think, with a lot of what's been going on in the world recently. It was quite interesting to see that.
Okay, I'm getting some good movie recommendation. I think one of the things I remember seeing, it's years ago as part of Brighton Festival, was like one of our kind of local comedians, and he emceed over the Highlander, which in some ways was hilarious, but at the same time also kind of took apart how ridiculous and how silly it was. So it had this kind of strange dual effect of both kind of ruining the movie, but also elevating and making it more entertaining at the same time.
I can see that, because I think there's Highlander for me fits into one of those films where I'd rather not watch it again because I'd like to remember it the way I remember it, not necessarily how it is. And so I can imagine rewatching it and kind of really wanting to like it, but also being kind of potentially... it's one of those films where I'm kind of concerned that if I was to rewatch it, then I would be hugely disappointed by the reality of it.
Okay, yeah, maybe leave that. I mean, I think I've rewatched it a number of times, and I think once you get past the ridiculousness of Sean Connery with a pearl earring apparently being Spanish, and the big bad guy that was it going to have the safety pins to kind of put his neck back together. And actually, on reflection, is quite a bad makeup job. The special effects. But I think it's one of those things you can just embrace it, and then you take it what it is. But I think one where I shouldn't have gone back was Thundercats.
Okay.
Because I think Thundercats in my head how it was, and then I rewatched randomly. A friend gave me an old VHS of Thundercats, and I was like, "Oh, cool, right? Let's." And that was quite disappointing because actually that particular episode was quite racist,
right? Okay.
Which I was completely oblivious to at the time. So that's one where I shouldn't have gone back.
I think there's quite a bit of that we don't spot, or we didn't spot at the time, and watching things through a kind of contemporary lens is quite. Makes a lot of kids' program was surprisingly violent. Which I don't think I really, or I obviously processed as normal at the time. And then when I think about the bar that I have for letting my kids watch stuff, and then I'm kind of like, oh my lord, I probably watched Terminator by the time I was his age. I was in a band many years ago called Stupid and Steve. We were a punk band, and most of the members of the band lived in the House of Rock, and we would obviously spend a lot of time hanging around post-gig in the House of Rock, kind of dream casting movies that have subsequently happened, most of them, but the one that's not happened is Thundercats. And we were, and for us, like, Vin Diesel was basically Pantera. You know, I think we struggled to cast all the rest of it. Do you think, you're a psychologist, you might know this, is all this stuff that I remember stopping me learning, like, useful things?
Well, as I seem to be remembering similar stuff, I'd like to think not. I think it gives us a unique lens, and you know, because I was born in '78, and I've read that, you know, we're you know, if you're born in that kind of like little bit between being a millennial and I think whatever came before, because, you know, like I don't know your exact age, but, you know, for me, I didn't actually use computers until my first year at university. I didn't actually have a phone until my third year at university. So, you know, my childhood was analog, and my adulthood has been digital, and you know, my sense that that's going to give you quite a unique perspective on the world, more so than the generation that came before or the generation that came after. So I'm telling myself that it's a benefit. It's
I saw a great tweet with someone who I imagine was probably of a similar age to us, saying, given that he can remember all of the words to Ice Ice Baby, having not heard it for 30 years, he wonders if it would be helpful for pop producers to make lyrics to pop songs slightly more educational in order to help us in later life. Which I can see. Yeah, I could totally see that. Shall we get started? Hello, you're listening to Do Yourself A Favour, the podcast about learning from experience and the things we do to make our lives easier. My name's Tim Sisney from Make Work Work Better, and each episode I'll be talking to my guests about their epiphanies, their inspirations, and the magic of their workflow. Excellent. Hello everybody, welcome to Do Yourself A Favour. I am very excited to welcome Maria Gardner to Do Yourself A Favour. Maria.
Hello, Tim.
Would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So other than referencing the preamble of being a huge fan of 80s cartoons and 90s action movies, by day I am a business psychologist, which for, I guess, the uninitiated means very much as it says on the tin, I apply psychology in the workplace. My particular lens right now, and this is obviously why Tim and I connected, is well-being. And I think, you know, why I'm particularly passionate about that is over the last 20 years I've had quite an exciting opportunity in that I started my career in the field of stress and around building mental toughness. I then spent a number of years working in psychometrics and test publishers with a particular lens on selection and assessment. I then spent a good chunk of time working with leadership development and like kind of going, how do people kind of achieve their potential? And then kind of over the last year, I've suddenly gone, actually, all of these pieces are part of the same whole. And I think sometimes, and what I felt frustrated the last year is that when people talk about well-being, sometimes it feels about well-being for well-being's sake and not thinking about the wider ecosystem within which we talk about it. So that's currently my kind of my focus and my mission is going, how do we take a more systematic approach to improving well-being? You know, it's you know, I was interested 20 years ago, and I kind of at times feel like I've had to wait 20 years for people to be ready to have the conversation that is needed to be had for a really, really long time. And for those of people that know me well, you know, I kind of say about how do we put wellbeing at the heart of business rather than just on a muck. And I think unfortunately there are too many wellbeing initiatives which are well intentioned but not well thought through, and I'm on a mission to try and change that. And
it's a mission we very much share. So it was fantastic for us to be introduced, and I'm really pleased to have you on the podcast. So we'll dive straight in. And the first question that I always ask everybody is, what's something that you wish you'd learnt sooner?
So this is actually a recent epiphany for me, which is quite ironic considering what I've just said. I was doing a lot of reading over the weekend about how the rates of presenteeism and leavism are just going through the roof. So basically, you know, people not being able to switch off, that they're turning up to work when actually they should be resting and recuperating, that they're working when they really should be taking holiday, and realizing, oh crikey, I'm actually quite guilty of that at the moment, which, considering part of my model is around the importance of refuelling and not just resting. I think not that it's something that I wish I'd learned sooner, but like I say, it's one of those things where it's easy to sometimes know this stuff academically, but not then go, how does that apply to me?
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, that's a very recent epiphany, going, I've been doing lots of resting, but I've not been doing enough refueling. And I think that's been quite challenging for people over the last 18 months, because the things that we would normally do to refuel, which is kind of seeing family, seeing friends, going out, having a good time, restaurants, socializing, for me that would be dancing, like that has been taken away. So I think we've had to do a lot of recalibrating or finding other ways of refueling. And yeah, there's a bit of trial and error. So that's I'd say is a recent insight or realization for myself, is that I myself actually need to do a bit more in terms of building in refueling, not just resting.
I don't think it's unusual for people who work very closely in an area to actually struggle with the walking like they talk it. I think you see that a lot with and it really interests me, especially in areas where there's a degree of self-awareness implicit in the work, that we all have massive blind spots about ourselves. And I think especially when you work on your own, or you spend a great deal of time kind of solo, not having those kind of, and then especially again over the last 18 months or so, when we've all been kind of physically isolated, not having that checkpoint that you have of whether it be co-workers or people you share a space with, and for people to actually kind of like call you out on that stuff, I think it does become harder to recognize when you're like not following your own advice.
Yeah, I think also what I struggle with is my natural instinct is to put everyone else first, to put the client first. I've got a 4-year-old, which I absolutely adore, but they can be quite demanding. I'm currently trying to teach him to wait his turn as opposed to interrupting whenever he wants to say something. So yeah, as a psychologist, my drive is always to go, how can I help this other person? As a parent, my drive is to go, how can I provide for my son? And it is kind of going, and then it's back to that classic, you've got to put your own gas, got to put your own, oxygen mask on first before you then put it on the other person. So yes, I have to work actively quite hard against that instinct of putting, kind of just putting all my energy into providing for other people and not for myself, because ultimately then I run out of the fuel I need to continue doing that. So yes, I do find I kind of need a refresher on that every so often. I might go, maybe I just need to write this down and stick it up my wall, or kind of put it in my diary as the goals, go, right, okay, what are you doing to refuel today?
And those kind of prompts can be super helpful, actually, to be able to just, one of the things that it's a getting things done tool or concepts that David Allen calls the horizons of focus, which are kind of about the levels of, I guess, perspective in your world. So you've got the stuff that's going on now, but then also the stuff you want to achieve in a number of years, and all of your purpose and principles and values. And one of those levels is around areas of responsibility, focus, things that all the roles you play in your life. And I find that hugely helpful to review those roles on a semi-regular basis, just to kind of go, am I balanced? Is there something that's ostensibly important to me that actually I'm paying no attention to at the minute? Or is there an area that I'm over concentrating on for whatever reason? And I think, you have to have some kind of prompt in order to kind of, because if you don't get your head out of the weeds often enough, then you are going to miss those opportunities.
Oh, I completely agree. And actually, one of the things I've been doing over the last a couple of years is trying to actively build in thinking time. Because I think it's so easy to get caught up in doing, whether it's doing for work, doing in terms of being a parent, doing in terms of having a home or a partner. So no, I actively self-challenge, whether it's just going for a walk or just kind of being in an environment where I just kind of remove all stimulations. There's phones away, TVs away, it's just me and my thoughts. And I've realized it's when I have some of my best ideas. So yeah, I think that kind of building in thinking time is important. But I was actually talking about to another wellbeing person just before doing this, and I was showing that I'm actually kind of quite old school. I have a diary. I don't think to, because for me there's something very kind of more tactile and involved in writing things down as opposed to typing something. And I was saying that the journal I use actually encourages goal setting in about 5 or 6 different areas. So it gets you to think about what goals do you want to set each week in terms of, say, career and finance, in terms of personal development, in terms of health, in terms of spiritual well-being, physical environment, and also family and friends. And I find that's quite a good structure, again, talking about balance, to think about, I guess, a kind of more holistic perspective going. And you might have days or weeks where you go all in on one thing, but then you need to kind of rebalance again. There was a book that I read earlier this year by, I think it's the sister of Mark Zuckerberg, and she was saying she got frustrated. She went through a phase of going, how do you do it all? And she's like, I can't do it all on a particular day. And she's like, if, for example, she's got 6 main areas in her life, then she's realized that she can probably do 3 well in any given day. And as long as the week overall looks balanced, that's how she manages her time. So she'll roughly pick out, what are the 3 things. So it might be, okay, well, today's going to be a family exercise and health day. And then another day might be, okay, well, it's going to be a work and a health day. So she's saying that's how she manages it, is kind of, you can look at each day, but then you look at the week overall to go, am I achieving that balance?
Okay. I think there's something about, I like the word balance, because balance doesn't, in this situation, balance doesn't necessarily mean that everything's equal, does it? It just means it's, and that balance could be different week to week, and it could be just like, if you've got the right balance for and some weeks, the right balance will be slightly tipped in favour of one thing or another thing. If you're on holiday, your balance should be tipped more towards your family relaxation and what's going on, and similarly sometimes in a working environment the balance will have to tip in the other direction. It is about making sure that kind of in a macro scale it's more level, as opposed to trying to do everything all the time. I think there's something very true about that. I'm really interested, and this is the second of probably what will be more tangents, but how do you think being a psychologist influences your parenting?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think as a psychologist, what the bit that drives me is kind of understanding what makes people tick. So yeah, how do I kind of explain it? So yeah, I think because I understand more, and this is kind of interesting, because my partner's a biochemist that specialises in sports nutrition.
Okay.
So we've both got that kind of evidence, kind of research background, but we come at it from completely different angles. So like, the kind of classic challenge of how do you get your kids to eat vegetables? Like my partner's looking at it in terms of going, well, which, what macronutrients does he need? And I'm going, well, okay, well, how, from a psychology point of view, how do I make it interesting? But I think more on a day-to-day basis, I think it's given me insights in terms of understanding, where he is developmentally on that, and thinking, there is kind of key moments. So for example, my son's going to be starting school in 2 weeks. Like, he's so, one thing I'm doing is he's going to be wearing a school uniform for the first time ever. So I've actually intentionally left that out in his bedroom so he can see it all the time, so that when he then has to start wearing it for school, he's already subconsciously built up that familiarization with the school uniform, as opposed to, hopefully, I'll tell you in 2 weeks' time, having the fight and the tears and the argument about wearing a tie and about wearing a shirt for the first time ever. So I think in terms of how being a psychologist influences being a parent, I think there's probably some aspects that I'm aware of, and I consciously think about how to use my training, my insights. And then there's other bits where I'm probably doing it but not aware I'm doing it, right, because it just probably gives me a different lens or a different insight that I'm subconsciously using without even being aware of it.
Are there any areas where you think you maybe know too much, where if you didn't know it, it would maybe easier? Okay.
I think so. I mean, I think business psychologists are different to other types of psychologists, and I apologize in advance if I insult everyone or anyone in particular. But generally, what I find is that business psychologists are a little bit more grounded. We're a little bit more kind of every day. We're, by the nature of applying psychology in the workplace, we are quite pragmatic. Particularly, if you're kind of a consulting business psychologist. In comparison, I remember hearing a story about a cousin of mine who's a clinical psychologist, and how she was out for dinner and she was psychoanalyzing the couple on the table next to her. And I'm thinking, just enjoy the dinner, just enjoy the person that you're sitting opposite with. So for me, I think sometimes the kind of psychologist is a level of awareness that I can tap into, but I don't have it turned on all the time. So if I'm talking to someone, I just want to enjoy the conversation. I can turn on that extra level of awareness to analyze their body language, the position of their head, what their hands doing, what their feet are doing, the intonation. I can think about the beliefs or values that go behind what someone is saying, but I don't need to think about that all the time. Okay. Or at least for me, I don't want to. I'd rather be present and in the moment. And maybe at times, my kind of psychology training is a superpower that I can kind of drawer when the situation is needed, as opposed to Clark Kent going around with his shirt pulled open, you know, all the time.
Okay, interesting. No, I only asked because my wife's a psychotherapist, and she was going through her training, particularly around development, child development, while she was pregnant with her second child. And there were certainly times where I think there was this sense for her that she was maybe knowing too much and maybe and not necessarily overthinking, but maybe just sort of a hyper awareness of potential impact or these kind of things, which, you know, she's obviously been able to rein in as time's gone, and she's become more assimilated the knowledge, I guess. But I think it was it's something that I wonder occasionally around how much whether some of the insights that you can gain from knowing about, you know, psychology or child development or some of these other kind of areas, which the vast majority of parents don't have access to. You know, how much of it is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I think, like I say, the type of psychology that I do, because it is, like I said, it's more pragmatic and it's less involved than, say, psychotherapy or clinical psychology, where you do really get into thinking about the psyche of the individual. So I have an awareness of it, but not a deep understanding or deep insight. So I can tap into a bit of it, but like I said, it's I think for that, it enables me to not have that burden of overthinking what's going on with him at any one time. And I mean, ultimately, we tend to have kind of regular chats as to go, well, how do we think things are going? Like, you know, if he's struggling to make friends at the playground, then we chat about, well, what could we do to support that, and why might that be happening? And, you know, we might, you know, definitely with my psychologist hat on, it's like, well, I can probably identify an interaction that he'd had maybe in the week or a couple of weeks previously that may well have then created the behaviour that we're seeing now. So it's like, okay, well, if I understand that's where it came from, how do we then support him moving forward? So I think, if anything, I think with the psychology knowledge that I have, I probably feel more empowered to be able to influence and support his development, as opposed to just seeing what happens.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's move on. What's a book that really changed the way you think about things? A book or a concept that changed the way that you think about things and sort of formed, I guess, the way you approach things now?
So I was thinking about that this morning, and I'd say definitely professionally, and probably to a certain extent on a personal level, is when I first came across the concept of mental toughness.
Okay. And
mental toughness, just to kind of explain to those listening that maybe haven't come across that concept before, and also is quite often misunderstood, is if you have a high degree of mental toughness, then rather, you know, because I think resilience is about bouncing back. If you have a high level of mental toughness, you don't even notice things as being stressful. Like, your tolerance point for the point at which you start feeling out of control and things are a bit more overwhelming, far higher than somebody that would have a lower level of mental toughness. So it means that you're being tough or macho. It's almost kind of a degree of sensitivity to the environment, the stimulus that you're experiencing. And at the time at which I came across this concept, I was studying my master's degree. I was up in Hull. I was working in a debt recovery call centre, an inbound debt recovery call centre, which was not a particularly pleasant environment. And I remember one week they had a cohort of about 10 people, and they put them through 2 weeks of product training. And then they're all ready to start on the Monday, and they all turned up on the Monday, and then they kind of realized actually what the job really entailed. 2 people came back nobody came back on the Wednesday, and then 1 person reappeared on the Thursday. And I kind of working in that environment, and I had the very glamorous job. They wouldn't train me up because I knew as a student, and I'd made it clear that I didn't see myself as having a career as a debt recovery specialist. So my job was, I had to target 40 calls an hour to tell people, I'm really sorry, we're too busy, can I ask somebody to call you back later? That was my job. 8 hours a day, 40 calls an hour. I'd take all of their contact details, so they thought they were finally through to someone, and then I go, really sorry, can we call you back? So whilst I was doing this very engaging, exciting, glamorous job, looking at the people around me, what I was fascinated was how some people kind of thrived in that environment and seemed to be completely immune to, kind of quite, at times, kind of quite unpleasant conversation. Literally you have people shouting, screaming, threatening physical harm. And it's like, well, what is the difference between the people that kind of thrive or at least survive in that environment and the ones that drop like flies? Mm-hmm. So that was the context. And I went along to this, kind of guest lecture on mental toughness, and is this it? Is this the thing? And also, I guess, maybe, I guess that's a moment of self-awareness, realize that I am somebody that naturally has kind of quite high levels of self-awareness. Like, I think my parents have put it down to me just being pathologically optimistic, because I never seemed bothered by anything. But actually, it, you know, was maybe something, and there's a physiological component as well. It's just my tolerance point at which I would consider something stressful was so much higher. And even when I do consider something stressful, for me, there is always a way around it. There is, it will never be that bad. It, you know, it will never last forever. There will always be something that I can do. And what, you know, I kind of realized is the way in which I would often be potentially stressful was very different to people around me.
Okay.
So it had this double whammy of creating this moment of self-awareness about myself, but also the environment I was in. And then that led to then me doing my master's. I did my MSc research looking at mental toughness and stress and performance in call centres, because, you know, it was such a fascinating environment, which then led to my first consultancy job. So in terms of a book or a concept that changed my life, it really, really did, because I say I guess there was a moment of self-awareness. It led to my research, it led to my first job, and it's also kind of led to where I am now. And I think sometimes I have kind of quite a unique take on the well-being conversation, because it feels like a lot of people are talking about well-being for well-being's sake, or that a lot of people talk about resilience, about bouncing back, and it's going, well, rather than people need to bounce back, why don't we give them the tools and resources so that they don't need to bounce? And for me, that feels so much more empowering and impactful than going, you're stressed, you're worn, you're worn down, you've hit your limit. How do we make you resilient? I'm going, well, let's make you tough. Let's make you mentally tough, so you don't have to go through that emotional, physiological roller coaster of needing to be resilient.
I mean, we've talked about this before, and I think there's one of the things that I struggle with a little around the current existing standard for well-being in a lot of organisations is that it is very reactive, and it does kind of assume harm has happened, as opposed to thinking about preventative approaches that could be taken. So I think there's certainly a huge potential audience for anything that addresses the how do we stop people getting to the point they're broken.
I think, unfortunately, I would say that sticking a whole load of people in a resilience workshop, it's easy, it's cheap, it ticks a box. What as you say, resilience work is about treating the symptoms rather than the cause, and often the cause of why those people potentially need to be resilient is more systemic, and it's about actually how the business runs and functions and is led, and that is a much bigger, more complicated bit of work that organisations are often less willing to do.
Absolutely.
So,
and also it relies on the organisation actually admitting some kind of responsibility or culpability as well. So a certain amount of organisational self-awareness, which again I think is quite is rare.
Yeah. So over when I was working directly in mental toughness, that was lovely. That for me was very rewarding. Since then, as I've worked for other organisations, a number of times I've been asked to go and deliver resilience training, and invariably they've been like 2 or 3 hours long, which is not enough time to do anything meaningful. And I'd say by and large I've hated every single one, because it's been so superficial. And when you kind of start to dig under why are these people needing resilience, it's going, well, the targets that are being given are completely unrealistic. Their workload is completely unrealistic. They've got no control over their workload. They're very explicitly giving competing priorities. They're going, well, do I do what this manager tells me, or do I do what this manager's telling me? If I do what this one wants to do, then I piss this one off, and I do that. And it's going, their lack of resilience is not the problem, but it ticks a box. And they can go, oh yeah, but we gave them resilience training. So I don't have an issue with resilience. Just to be clear, I don't have an issue with resilience training in itself, because I think it has a place, but it should not be a substitute for, like I say, it's a badly sized, ineffective sticking plaster. When often I say that what needs working on is usually much more systemic. It's about the design of the job, is about the culture of the organisation.
I mean I've had similar conversations around mental health first aid training, and I'm a mental health first aider. I think it's an incredibly the training itself is massively useful, and I think that it's a very fantastic signposting initiative for organisations. So again, I don't want to come across as critical of it as in and of itself, but when organisations only have mental health first aiders, to do my standard drawing comparisons between mental health and physical health in the workplace. A warehouse would have, a warehouse or a factory or anywhere where there's physical risk. They have first aiders, but they also have banisters on the stairs and guards on the machines and processes in place that will stop people getting hurt. And then if there is an accident, there's a first aider to deal with it, and then processes in order to make sure that person is okay and to make sure it doesn't happen again. And none of that systemic or proactive work is commonplace, particularly in knowledge work organisations in particular.
It's kind of if you think, as you say, I think the physical analogy is a good one. So it's like, if you have a paper cut, then a plaster out of the first aid box would be sufficient. And he's like, you kind of go and carry on. But if in fact your injury is far more significant, say you fall down the stairs and it's blatant that you've, let's say, broken your leg, the first aid box is not going to do you any good. And I guess in America they call them first responders. They're the first people on the scene, but you wouldn't expect a first responder, in this case a paramedic, to reset your leg. You'd get sent to hospital. Like, you'd be sent to go and have access to the appropriate specialist care. And I think it's got to be the same in terms of mental health, that it's great to have your kind of mental health first aiders on the ground to be able to kind of spot, and yes, okay, they can potentially deal with a kind of equivalent of a paper cut, but anything more than that, there's also got to be in place that you can refer them on to the more kind of in-depth specialist help. And as I've got a couple of friends that are mental health first aiders, and again, one of their frustrations is that, again, they can be treated again, they're kind of the new tick box. Last year was all kind of resilience training. This year seems to be, everyone's got mental health first aiders, but there's not sufficient support given to the mental health first aiders. Like, who looks after their mental health? But secondly, often there isn't enough of them. If you think again about physical health, there is a recommendation for how many first aiders you would have per number of employees on a particular site. And surely it would make sense to apply the same principle in terms of mental health first aiders, but right now that's not in place. There's a kind of a guidance or a recommendation, but it's not, I'm not sure it's taken up that well. And then there's the whole consideration as to, well, who becomes trained up to be mental health first aiders in the first place? Like, who decides who they should be? Are they the right people? Are they the kind of people that the staff would naturally want to go and talk to, that would confide in? Because if you train someone up that nobody likes as a mental health first aider, no offense, that's a waste of money.
And also, there's a sense that also, just thinking of that, one of the and this, I think this happens with wellbeing and mental health a lot. Often the people who are drawn to help in those situations are people who have had their own experiences, and so you can and those people are always or usually very passionate about the subject and will give it a lot of attention and will do it to the best of their ability, but aren't necessarily without the right support, aren't necessarily in a place themselves in order to be able to be put in that situation where they may be exposed to other people's poor mental health and be required to support them. Because then you've got to think about what is the resilience of the mental toughness or the support systems for the mental health first aiders, and actually is their starting point secure enough to be able to help? And I know that
I think there's always a risk, if I said often the people that get drawn into being sometimes being a kind of a therapist or a psychologist, often people get attracted or interested in that subject because they themselves have experienced some kind of trauma and they want to help other people. But there's always a risk as to whether or not they have sufficiently let go of that trauma. So they have a degree of empathy, which can be incredibly powerful. But for me, I'm always concerned that if somebody hasn't fully resolved that trauma, there's a risk that they could then project that on the person that they are trying to help. And often it wouldn't be intentional, but it would be accidental. And I was sharing with someone the other day that when I was a student, I mean, this is always kind of this is way pre-mental health first aiding, that I was part of an initiative, and that was a student listening service. And we kind of talked about it being kind of like Samaritans for students. But it was very clear that we did not have the training to give advice. So we were, we were a listening service. That was it. We could refer and we could listen, but we were not there to give advice. And considering that with students, it was a 2.5-day process of being trained and assessed before we were let loose. And you could go through those 2.5 days and then come back and go, really sorry, we don't think you're ready. And then when we were on duty, we always had a partner. So there was always that. So as a group, as a whole group as Nightline, we were very tight. You know, there was a lot of like social bonding, which may not or not included alcohol, but there's a lot of work that went into creating that bond as a whole group. But then also there's on duty pairing, so that if you did have a difficult, and you could be dealing with exam stress, you could be dealing with a relationship breakup, similarly you could be dealing with someone, you know, contemplating suicide. So you also were always partnered with someone, so that if you did have a difficult call, you immediately had that support person there to help you process and deal with whatever impact that had on you, as well as then the kind of the wider community. And you know, I look at the mental health first aiders now and thinking, crikey, again, we were doing that 20 years ago as students, and I said it was a 2.5 day process to be even considered to be active on duty. And I do wonder again sometimes, you know, I know there's kind of like a 2-day training for people to do the mental health first aid training, but what has gone into deciding whether or not that is the right person to actually do that role? And if they did that training, is the trainer in a position to go back to the business after and go, look, I've had the personal training, but I don't think they are suitable. There's got to be that opportunity to have that sense check of going, just because I've had the training doesn't necessarily mean that they should be doing this.
And also, there's I think the standard for the support and mentoring around of those people in the business, there is no standard for that as far as I know. And I know that different organisations approach it very differently, and it feels like there needs to be more best practice around the implementation of it, because it's such a good training program. It's such a good training program, and the people who deliver it are incredibly passionate, and the people who do it are there because they really want to make a difference. And actually, I sort of feel like if the businesses then aren't providing the necessary support to enable them to be effective, and also doing all the other things that they need to do in a business in order to reduce the number of people. Effectively, what you want at the end of the day is those people to actually not be having to use that training. Ideally, you want to have and genuinely having one of the things that I think drives the whole approach of a lot of corporate wellbeing is this idea that your mental health is something you bring with you to work, as opposed to it being something which is potentially damaged or exacerbated by the work itself. That doesn't seem to be something that's accepted. But no, that's well, let's move on, because we could talk about this particular subject for hours, but we're already an hour if you count our preamble, so we should probably crack on a little bit. So we're into kind of like the recommendation sort of portion of the questions now. So I'd like to know about what's a tool that you use every day, you couldn't live without. What's that look like for you?
That'd probably be my journal.
Okay.
I mean, I know the question says, is that the same question as what's the most useful thing I've bought recently?
No, that's a different question.
That's a different question, sorry.
Okay.
So that would be my journal, and I spent a long time. I'm kind of quite geeky, because if I'm going to find something, I want to kind of get absolutely the right one. So I came across this journal a couple of years ago. It's called Inspire Now. Why I liked it is it encourages you to think about goal setting in lots of different areas, and it gets you to think about goals on a kind of a weekly basis. It's got habit tracking, which kind of going to bed on time, eating vegetables, like I still need to kind of keep myself accountable. But it also has like a gratitude bit built in there to kind of encourage you to reflect as to what went well each day. And I know I have colleagues that find me hilariously archaic, the fact that I still have a physical diary, but for me it's a kind of tactile experience. And I do remember reading research that say if you write a goal down, it's so much more powerful than if you just talk about it. And again, I think if you write it down in person, like if you literally hold a pen, there's a lot more kind of connection to it than just typing it on a screen. So for me, in terms of like every day, it is my journal. I say kind of gives me that structure in terms of setting goals across the multiple areas, so kind of having some balance, but also then to kind of prioritize. It's got little boxes you can tick it off, and we like ticking things off. But then it does also encourage me to think about, well, actually, how has the day gone? What has gone well? And we know from some of the positive psychology stuff that if you kind of think of 3 positive things each day, then it literally can help rewire the brain in terms of a kind of more positive mindset. So that's probably the thing on a day-to-day basis that I wouldn't want to live without.
The variety of kind of life planner, goal setting, journal, diary kind of stationery now there's quite a lot of them, aren't there? There was, I remember
Yes.
a few years ago seeing, so maybe 5 or 6 years ago, getting something for my wife for her birthday, which was or Christmas. Christmas will make more sense because then it would be like for the following year. It was called a Trig Life Mapper, and it had a very very similar approach, and then kind of every month it would have a bit of a review of what you were doing, and every quarter have something similar. And it wasn't the only thing like it, but it was certainly it was in a sort of a very sparse field. But there's a lot of that sort of thing available now, isn't there?
It's caught up. So there's a book that I just remembered. There's a book I read about 10 years ago, and I can't remember the author, but it's literally, I think the book was called about get your life together.
Okay.
And yeah, it literally talked about, I guess, being more intentional in your goal settings, rather than just. I think it's often we focus on one or two superficial areas, like we want to stop smoking, we want to lose weight, we want a new job, but we don't put a lot of it often doesn't go much depth beyond that, and we often don't take a more holistic approach. And I guess it can sound quite fuzzy, but it's thinking about, well, actually, what is the life that you want to have, and create it intentionally, as opposed to just allowing life to happen to you and you only think about a couple of areas and the other one's going to happen by accident. So like I said, that was a book that I read, at least 10 years ago, that really kind of resonated with me, because I do like a bit of kind of, I love reading around personal effectiveness. So when I found that journal a couple of years ago, it was almost a physical manifestation of what I was reading about 10 plus years ago, about the whole like bullet journals. I must have never quite got my head around like the different symbols, the need for different colored pens, but whatever. I mean, I think ultimately whatever works, like whatever, you've got to find your own system. I think the only thing my journal doesn't do, which I know is kind of particularly powerful, is there's certain other journals that I've come across where it encourages you to write down your top goals every single day.
Right.
So it just maintains your focus. So my journal doesn't have space for that. And I did have a look at their journal, but they tried to then cram so much onto one page that then you'd have to have handwriting the size of a gnat to actually meaningfully then use it to plan your day. So yeah, I think there's still scope to have the ultimate journal. I've been on a hunt. So I think my Inspire Now journal is close, because like I say, it gets me to set goals and plan my day. Sorry, I apologise for the listeners if this is really not interesting. But
I think you are peak. Do yourself a favour right now. This is fine. So
yeah, I like a good journal. I like planning.
And how do we feel about pens? Are you fussy about your pens, or are you kind of whatever?
Actually, as I'm left-handed, I have to use pencils. Pens are not my friends, because most pens are designed for the ink to flow in a particular way, which if you're left-handed doesn't work. And also, it's not so much the case now, but I had for many years when I was working in consultant, what you would do on a day-to-day basis could change quite significantly. 1 minute you think, oh yeah, I'm going and running that 3-day training course, then the next thing you get a phone call and say, scrap that, we need you on this instead.
Okay.
So you never wrote anything in pen, because you never knew that it would genuinely come off. So no, I'm a pencil girl.
Okay. Any particular kind of pencil?
What am I using at the moment? It's a Papermate that kind of twiddles. So I don't have to sharpen.
Excellent. So you're a mechanical pencil person.
It's a twiddle with a rubber on the end.
There's the one thing that I used to find like kind of probably sadistically amusing was always in my previous life watching lefties try to write on whiteboard.
Hideous.
Because it's just like it just gets rubbed out as you go along, and I'm just really like.
Yeah. As a pens, whiteboards, checkbooks, tin openers. Yeah, not my friend. I remember kind of painfully spending about 10 minutes trying to open a can of beans. Like I just could not get this tin opener to work. Finally got it open. And then when I went to rinse it out to put it in the bin, I realised that actually it was a ring pull and I'd been trying to open it upside down.
Oh, that's classic. No, I like it. So let's follow this thread through. So what's the last really cool thing that you got that you're really proud of, that you're like, that's my new shiny? What's
my new shiny. This I'm probably kind of quite about 2 or 3 years behind the curve, but I actually finally recently started listening to audiobooks, and what I find is I love that. You probably get the sense from like when I talk about my journal. I'm kind of quite a tactile person, so I love the experience of holding a book. particularly with a workbook that I want my post-it notes, I want to be able to kind of underline bits, but there's certain books where it's just kind of quite good to, whether more entertainment. So I've actually finally started with an Audible subscription, and I can now walk and listen.
Okay.
So that's, I guess, my way of building a little bit more kind of personal development time. Because like I say, I generally find, like, my mum, she loves listening to podcasts while she's cleaning the kitchen. I can't do it because I want to become fully immersed. If I'm learning something, I want to be in the moment. So I can't multitask and do another task, but I can walk. So it's not very exciting, it's not very sexy, it's not very techy, but I have recently kind of fully embraced the experience of audiobooks whilst walking, and that's kind of been working quite well for me.
And how do you approach because I don't know, I imagine you as a bit of are you a scribbler? Are you a kind of note-taker scribbler when you're reading, or do you just kind of...
I think generally, let's say kind of workbooks, I'm kind of quite respectful of my books.
Okay.
I'm not somebody that would kind of bend the spine back. Like, by the time I finish a book, it would look almost immaculate as when I first opened it. So as it tends to be kind of pencil underlined and post-it notes, I would never write on the book.
Okay. So how do you do how do you do that sort of retention stuff from audiobooks? Because it's the one thing that I know a lot of people, myself included, who are die-hard dead tree books, cite as being a challenge with audiobooks. Is that kind of how are you approaching that?
By listening to the book several times. Because also what I find is that, like with any good book, is if you're reading something and it kind of triggers an interesting thought, if you're reading a physical book, then you just stop reading and kind of follow that thought through. With an audiobook, that's a bit more tricky. So yeah, I've got kind of a couple of books that I'm reading, and I'll just, if I realize that I've gone off on a tangent, then I'll just rewind and re-listen to that bit again. Or it might be going actually, because the books I'm reading are more kind of like mindset stuff as opposed to kind of technical content.
Okay.
So it's more into my personal development as opposed to content that I would use for my work.
Okay.
So it's almost kind of like having a coach, like just kind of in my head, or at least in my ears while I'm talking. So yeah, so I will listen to it several times over. And there was somebody, this is more kind of an entrepreneur context, and saying that people have a terrible habit of just consuming multiple business books over and over and over without actually then taking the lessons from them. And their advice was just, well, pick a couple of books and just read them over and over again. Like, make sure you fully absorb the lessons. And they talk about, kind of novelty for entertainment, repetition for results. So just pick a couple of books that really, have the messages that you need to hear, and either read them several times over or listen to them several times over. So that's for me, that's how I'm doing it. And there's a bit where I think, actually, I need to hear that again. Then I just go back to that chapter. So it's still a relatively new thing for me, because I said, I've had lots of people around me that love audiobooks, that love podcasts, and I've never been able to get on with them. And I've suddenly discovered how to consume that kind of content in a way which works for me. So that's why that would be my new shiny at the moment, which I know is probably about 5 years behind everyone else.
It's, well, I mean, I've not got there. I could do podcasts, but yeah, audiobooks I've still not managed to click with. Are you a fiction reader? How does that?
I am. So business books or books for learning are always the physical book, because I want my post-it notes. Fiction is on my Kindle. So I was initially a bit wary about Kindles, because, like I say again, I do like the tactile experience of holding a book. But for me, I am a ridiculously fast reader, particularly if it's fiction. So on holiday, I would average a good 300 to 400 word book a day.
Right. Wow.
So if I was going on a week's holiday, I'd need at least 7 books. I have been on holidays where I've had to restart reading the first book before the end of the holiday because I've run out of books. So my Kindle now has hundreds of books on it. And it fits in my handbag. It's an amazing. And yeah, I definitely like my Kindle Unlimited subscription. And similar to, I guess, an initial chat about 90s movies and the, for me, just being entertainment, that's what fiction books are. They are pure entertainment, for kind of switching off, taking my brain somewhere else. So yeah, fiction books on Kindle, business books on, or kind of workbooks are kind of on a kind of a slightly overwhelmed bookshelf.
Aren't they all? No, I feel you about the Kindle. That's something that I found is that what I tended to use my Kindle for is books for holiday. So not having to take up half of my luggage allowance with books. But or really thick books. So I I remember reading Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is a chunky old book, and tried to do that on commutes, and it was heavier than my laptop, and it was so, and it wasn't so. I put it on my Kindle, just like it fits in my pocket, and then I could just carry it. So from that point of view, so just like big thick books that I'd been putting off reading because just they were in some cases too heavy to hold, then suddenly became a lot more accessible through something like a Kindle. Also, books with embarrassing covers.
Unfortunately, I don't think I've been buying enough of those. I think 50 Shades of Grey, that was kind of probably a popular one when Kindles became available. So then you could kind of read that without publicly declaring it.
That's right. Yeah, I can imagine. There was a book I read fairly recently that was recommended by a friend of mine called Existential Kink, which is a kind of shadow, sort of Jungian shadow self type approach to kind of dealing with sort of self-sabotaging behaviour that I was recommended, and it was really interesting. There was it was a bit witchy in places that I didn't really get on with that, but the front cover did basically look like a bad erotic novel, and so I elected to get that on Kindle rather than because I just I mean I wasn't commuting at the time, but I just couldn't put up with the comments from my wife. I don't think so. It was right. Let's wrap it up with the last question then, Maria. And I'd like you to complete the sentence. Do yourself a favour and
crikey, switch off this bank holiday and close the laptop. Go and live, experience life. Switch off from work for a few days. It'll be there when you come back on Tuesday.
Lovely. That's nice. What are you doing on the bank holiday?
I have family visiting. I think we might check out something at Arundel Castle, and there's some kind of children. I mean, most of it's kind of child themed, and then I think there's something about kind of toddlers making music, which will probably be absolutely hideous. I think that's on Bank Holiday Monday.
I made the mistake of giving my 3-year-old a harmonica. I don't know why I did that. I found an old harmonica, and he was like, "What's that, Daddy?" And I was like, "Oh, do you want it?" And never again. Don't give a 3-year-old a harmonica. That's my do yourself a favour and for this week. Maria, thank you so much. Thank you. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Where can people find you?
I guess these days it's on the internet, isn't it? So I kind of fairly regular on LinkedIn. If you wanted to check out my website, then it's psychologyworks.global.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us on Do Yourself a Favour, and we'll speak to you again soon. Bye.
Thank you, Ben.
You've been listening to Do Yourself a Favour, the podcast about learning from experience and the things we do to make our lives easier. Brought to you by Make Work Work Better. My name's Tim Sisney from Make Work Work Better. Our theme tune is by The Titanics. Talk to you again soon.